Okay, welcome everyone. This is, I've lost track. What day of the session is this? Fourth or the third, depending how we count. Yeah. So, yeah, this practice isn't so easy, is it? No, it's not so easy to sit still. It's physical practice. And it can often be painful. Yeah. Especially as we get older. Have various ailments that afflict us. So, and yet isn't it interesting how important it seems to be still? That without this kind of some practice like this, where we just sit down and be still, it's hard to be clear about anything. And that clarity seems to come when we're not trying so hard to find it. Yeah. So I'd like to talk about that a little bit today, and it's a teaching in Chan called Wu-wei, which the Chinese word means non-doing. It is action or inaction that occurs spontaneously, selflessly, unconditionally. It's a teaching that's very common in the Taoist tradition, which is part of Zen, and it rears its head quite a bit in Zen koans as well. But like most Zen teachings, the nature of Wu-wei, or non-doing, usually defeats most efforts to explain it. So it's often described in negative terms rather than positive ones. So I enjoyed hearing Jun Roshi's stories about Zen Mountain Center yesterday. And so I remember this, a time when I was in the early years of being at the Zen Center. I think I had, by this point, lost both my parents, so I was a little rootless and kind of wandering. But somehow I got it in my head that it would be a good idea to go and give a gift to the Hopis. I was living in LA. And so I got it in my head, and it's in the Buddhist tradition, monks carry a staff with little rings on it that make a noise, and when they go on pilgrimage, the idea is that they carry the staff and they hit the ground with it, and it jingles, it makes a noise, and it scares away all the insects. Or it lets the villagers know that a monk is coming and alerts them to, the monk's coming. Anyway, it's called a kakara in Sanskrit. And for some reason, don't ask me why, I thought this would be a good thing to give to the Hopis. Kind of cringe just thinking about it now, how presumptuous this was, but I thought it was a good idea at the time. And so I like to carve things in those days, and I did quite a little. I sculpted things in wood, and I got a staff and I carved it and sanded it and made a point on the top, and I went over to the Theological Society, which had a big store in LA, and I bought one of these rings, and I took it and I fit it to the staff, and I made this kakara. And then I convinced two of my Dharma brothers, Charles Dario Olson, who has passed away, and my other Dharma brother, Ron Dolko Sharon, who lives in Portland now, a psychotherapist. I convinced them to come with me, and we drove to Arizona. It was a great adventure, and I knew kind of where the Hopis were on the map, so we drove up to the mesas. There was one road, I think, going up to the mesas, you know. And we went to the first mesa. We drove into the first mesa, and there were people out all over. It was a weekend or something, and there were people in the streets, and they were having a good time. They were talking to each other, and so we didn't really know what to do. So we parked the car and got out and kind of just hanging out there, you know. And, didn't really know what to do, and then all of a sudden some dancers came out of a kiva, and they were all in costumes, and they were dancing and singing, and they went through the streets, and everyone was all playing, and it was really cheerful and joyful, and there was a clown making fun of people, and they danced and sang, and it all came alive, and then they disappeared. They went down into another kiva in another part of the village and disappeared, and then everything got quiet. Everyone just kind of hanging out again, you know, talking and eating, and we're just like, and I'm thinking, well, who do I give this staff to? I mean, how do I do this? And I mean, do they really need it? I mean, what's, I'm trying to be respectful here, but I'm a little confused, you know, because who's getting the teaching? I'm actually kind of inspired by the Hopis, the way they're hanging out, and I feel awkward. And so we just hung, I couldn't figure out how to proceed. It just seemed, who do I give it to? How do I do this? Is there a procedure for this? Is it, I don't know this culture. I'm a white guy, kind of awkward. I'm not used to hanging out like this, you know. I don't do this in my culture. I do things, but I don't hang out and just talk story. June does. She's from Hawaii. They do that very well in Hawaii, but that's not my upbringing. So I'm kind of just feeling awkward and self-conscious. And then they'd come out of the kivas again and they dance, and this went on all day. And then it got, the day was getting long. It was, you know, getting the end of the day, and the sun was starting to get closer to the horizon, and I realized that there was apparently nothing I was gonna be able to do here with this staff, and I didn't, so I was kind of a little deflated, and we got in the car and drove out with the staff, drove back out through the other side of the reservation and then down into the desert. And we got somewhere, finally it was dark and we were in the desert somewhere, and we get out and camp and, you know, made a big fire, drinking beer, or cows somewhere. We're in the middle of nowhere. And, you know, I've got a big bonfire going. And the moths were flying into the fire, you know, time bombing into the fire. And I thought, hey, let's get the staff and put it out here and see if it works. Put it out, it didn't work. A lot of moths died that night. Got up next morning, and well, that was that, and drove back, left the staff in the desert, didn't give it to anyone, and drove back to LA. So I thought I was going to give a gift to the Hopis, but what it turned out is they gave a gift to me just by being who they were, just watching how they lived their lives in their village, and that was inspiring to me. I had never experienced that before, that kind of community, the way they were together. So Wu-wei is literally means non-action, and not so easy to say exactly what this is. It doesn't mean being quiestic. It doesn't mean being passive in the face of the need to do something. But maybe we can discover what it is by saying what it's not, by eliminating our all the ways that we obstruct it. So Wu-wei is found kind of like a blind person finds a wall so they don't walk into it, or water finds its way running downhill. So Chuang Tzu, one of the great Taoist masters in China, said, "The sound of water says what I think." So Wu-wei may express itself in action or inaction, and it may appear different from the outside, but perhaps from the inside it's the same. So Thomas Merton, in The Way of Chuang Tzu, says, "The non-action of a wise man is not inaction, it is not studied, it is not shaken by anything. The sage is quiet because he is not moved, not because he wills to be quiet. His quietness is the mirror of heaven and earth. This is the perfect Tao." So when non-action appears in inaction, it's peaceful, still, silent. But it can also appear in the midst of action as something something done intuitively, unself-consciously. It's arising out of the events that are taking place, like the movement of water is always appropriate to the context or the circumstances of the moment it's in. Water, tea rests in my cup, and if I pour it out, it'll fall to the floor. So we're talking about in the fourth paramita. The fourth paramita of a bodhisattva is virya, or energy. And the idea here is that, as you have discovered, practice takes energy, right? Takes quite a bit of energy, actually. First of all, you have to get here and arrange your life so you can get here. But then when you get here, when you do this practice, it's not really a goal that you're not doing it for a goal. When you do sambo, you wash the dishes or cut the vegetables in the kitchen, but you just do it. You don't do it with some idea, oh, I'm going to get this done in 5 minutes or 10 minutes. You might have a deadline. We're on a schedule. Lunch has to be served at 12. So you have to get it done by lunch, or a little bit before, because maybe it has to be cooked. But you know what I mean, don't you? When you're doing something without a goal, you're just doing it. And there's no self in the doing. And that's very pleasant, actually. Pleasant way to work, pleasant way to do something. And it turns out we actually can get a lot done with that kind of action, selfless action. So there's no self in it. So there's a koan in case 61 of the Blue Cliff record, Feng Shui's speck of dust. Feng Shui gave a teaching saying, establish one speck of dust and the homeland prospers. Do not establish a speck of dust and the homeland perishes. Shui Dao lifted up his staff and said, even so, are there patch-robe monks with the same birth and the same death? Establish one speck of dust and the homeland prospers. Do not establish a speck of dust and the homeland perishes. So sometimes this koan might be interpreted as being like attached to emptiness, and then you don't get anything done, so you don't function. But I don't think that's Feng Shui's intention here at all. It sounds like he's saying, if we're active and we function, the nation prospers, and if we're passive and we don't do anything, the nation is lost. The nation doesn't grow, it's not healthy. But then if you read the full context from where this koan came, from the continuum of 5 lamps, it has another nuanced meaning. Feng Xiao gave a teaching saying, establish one speck of dust and the homeland prospers. The villagers knit their brows in anxiety. Do not establish a speck of dust and the homeland perishes. The 100 households live in peace. When you understand this, then there is nothing more and everything is your teacher. This is the teaching of Wu-wei. It's very common in Taoism. And the idea here is, the stronger and bigger the government gets, then you get people coming in, bureaucrats and clever people that can put more regulations on our village and tax us more, and like it's much more complicated. So if the government doesn't grow, then just leaves me alone, let me farm and take my food to the market and just, get out of my way. They don't cause so much trouble when the government's not so big. It's a very Taoist teaching. So, seems to me this is a good teaching for our time. Now, I want to be very clear, I'm not talking about being quiescent, I'm not talking about being passive, but we are so quick to judge, so quick to offer our opinion about whatever the subject is, without really reflecting on it or listening to another point of view. We just are in our own bubble, and we assume that if everyone else is in the same bubble, but they aren't. So we might have the best of intentions, but even with good intentions, there might be unintended consequences to our actions. And it's almost like almost everyone feels like they are a victim. Even rich people feel like they're victims of poor people, which is absurd, but everyone can feel like a victim. No one thinks they're the perpetrator, but you could feel like a victim, and your actions could end up being that of a perpetrator to somebody else. The line, if we can't have conversations where we listen to each other, and we acknowledge that someone might have a different, totally different perspective than we do, and we can't listen to them without demonizing them and questioning their motives, then the line between that conversation, what's the next? It's either a conversation or it's violence, and there's not much in the middle there. If we can't talk, then what's left at the end of the day is power and violence. So I remember a story when June, Roshi, and I were at Auschwitz several times. We listened to a lot of stories of people and their experiences with Auschwitz, which affected so many people that weren't even there. Not to mention the people that were there that were dehumanized, and many lost their lives. There was I remember, I think he was German, or he might have been Polish. It was a young man that was there talking about his father had been a survivor of Auschwitz. And his father couldn't talk about it. And his father ended up being pretty abusive to him as the son. So here you have a case where someone has clearly been abused as a victim in a camp where no one should ever have been, and never should have been, and not the trauma and the pain of that was so massive that he was unable to deal with it. Totally understandable. And ended up being a victim in the camps, ended up being the perpetrator of similar kind of, or some kind of abuse to his son. That's not uncommon in family systems for this kind of abuse to be carried on generation to generation. One person is abused, and if they don't deal with that, if you don't heal that, then you end up kind of carrying it on. You were the victim here, and later you're the perpetrator. So I guess all I'm trying to say, and I don't want to talk about politics, although it is kind of the elephant in the room. What I'm trying to say is that our political system is broken. It's very difficult now to have conversations with people, especially across any kind of difference. And we are a Sangha. We are not a tribe. We could be made up of different tribes. We're not a family. We're made up of many different families. And the Sangha, if we're truly a Sangha, seems to me, is truly inclusive. That means everyone is welcome here. Everyone. And I wonder if we really believe that. I think we kind of get stuck in a confirmation bias of whatever silo we're in. And we're all in silos, let's face it, if we're listening to things from a particular point of view. And then you assume everyone in the Sangha should be having the same point of view, but maybe they don't. And then you might be shocked to find that someone is maybe there's a MAGA Republican here in the Sangha. And they probably don't feel like they could talk out loud being a MAGA Republican, because most of us tend to be pretty progressive in our politics. I'm guessing that's the case for most people. So what would it mean to not just impulsively act out our politics and our opinions and be selfless in terms of how the kind of environments we create and the invitation we give to people to truly be who they are with all their complexities and all their different points of view. Different ethnicities, different nationalities, different gender preferences, different pronouns, a lot of differences. What would it mean to practice Wu-wei, to practice non-action in a world where things are chaotic and people are kind of reacting all the time? What would it mean if we didn't react in that way, but we were able to be present in a way that's respectful and open-hearted? So that seems to have seeped into my Dharma talk, because I can't avoid politics. It's here, but I don't really want to talk about it. It doesn't belong in the Dharma talk, or at least not partisan politics. But we are very political as a culture. So what I'm trying to talk about, and I'm getting a little distracted by the politics, is it is possible to show up here and behave and improvise depending on the context we're in. And that's kind of what Wu-wei is about as a teaching. So, a monk asked Yumin, what is the teachings of a whole lifetime? And Yumin said, an appropriate response, an appropriate statement. How would you know what the appropriate statement is? There's no rules about what the appropriate statement's going to be. So if you watch bodhisattvas and how they behave in social situations, you'll notice that no bodhisattva is perfect, but they tend to behave in a way that if you're looking at it from the outside, you say, well, how do they know how to behave in that context so skillfully? How do they know? I think they're just practicing the three tenets. Not knowing, bearing witness, loving action. With no self there. And bearing witness isn't about fixing something, it's about being with the situation fully. And the situation might be really painful. And the more painful the situation is, the more we want to fix it. We have a knee-jerk reaction. I want to fix it so I'll feel better. I don't think we can fix our politics anytime soon. So I think we might need to do quite a bit of bearing witness to pain and disagreements and chaos. Things are changing so fast. It's not skillful to have a fixed point of view when things are changing the way they are. You gotta be flexible. You have to listen to another point of view and not just form an opinion based on one little tribe that you're in. Life is lived best when it's living itself. I think that's kind of the fourth paramita, virya. It's like being a warrior, showing up and improvising in the situation and letting go of your preconditioned assumptions about what the situation actually is before you're in it. Trusting the universe, that's kind of hard to do. We want to be in control of the universe. We want to project our own version of how we think it should be, when in fact it's just the way it is. And it may not be the way we would like it to be. So Suzuki Roshi said, so if you are attached to the idea of what you have done, you are already involved in a selfish idea. It's possible to find stillness within activity itself. Now, this is why I say, trust stillness, don't necessarily trust quietness, because that's situational. We live on Lake Street, it's not quiet. We're not in the mountains somewhere, we're in the city, it's noisy. But in the midst of the noisy city, you can find stillness. So Chuang Tzu says, again, this is Taoist teachings, when an archer is shooting for nothing, he has all his skill. If he shoots for a brass buckle, he is already nervous. If he shoots for a prize of gold, he goes blind or sees two targets. He is out of his mind. His skill has not changed, but the prize divides him. He cares. He thinks more of winning than of shooting, and the need to win drains his power. Lao Tzu says, less and less is done until non-action is achieved. When nothing is done, nothing is left undone. The world is ruled by letting things take their course. It cannot be ruled by interfering. Again, Lao Tzu, governing a large country is like cooking a small fish. When people are not provoked, their lives are contented and full, because nothing disturbs the natural order. Everything stays in its proper place. Taoism, it's so different than our culture.
Can you repeat that, please?
Yeah. Governing a large country is like cooking a small fish. When people are not provoked, their lives are contented and full, because nothing disturbs the natural order. Everything stays in its proper place. So there's one final koan I'll give you, and then we could maybe have some discussion. This comes from the book of so I'm giving you some koans that I think you'll find that if you start looking at koans, you'll find this Wu-wei teaching is actually quite not uncommon in Zen teachings, because Chan was very much influenced by Taoism. He was also influenced, obviously, by Mahayana Buddhism, but it was this marriage between Buddhism and Taoism that became Zen. And so we owe a debt to the Taoists. They bring in that kind of sacrilegious sense of humor that's not necessarily found in all the lists in Buddhism. 8 this, 3 that, 4 that. Anyway, like Taoism brings in wine and poetry. So here's a koan from the Book of Equanimity, case 21. Ungon sweeps the ground. Attention. As Ungon was sweeping the ground, Dogo said, "You're hard at it." Ungon replied, "You should know there's one who isn't hard at it." Dogo said, "So, is there a second moon?" Ungon held up his broom, saying, "Which moon is this?" And Dogo desisted. And commenting on this, Gensha said, "Indeed, this is the second moon." And Ungon commented on it saying, "The butcher watches the maid politely." So this is an interesting koan, and clearly what Umgon is saying, that you can be sweeping the grounds and not be busy. We think of work as being busy, but when you're busy, you don't necessarily get a whole lot done. You just get busier being busy. But if you're just doing what's in front of you, right, in the sense of Wu-wei, where there's no self in the doing, then quite a lot gets done. And then the rest of the koan is secondary to that. And he says, then the Dogo says, "So is there a second moon?" And it's a kind of a clever, he's trying to be clever as a Zen person, saying, is there a, are you saying there's something more? Which is the moon? Where is the enlightenment? And so the other teachers that are commenting on this are kind of making fun of the fact that they have this conversation at all about what the moon is, where is it, who is the second moon. So that's my talk for today, and I thought maybe we could have some conversation about it, about this. What's coming up for you as I'm talking about this. How does this strike you?
I have a question.
Yeah, Gina.
So, in this process of not knowing, bearing witness, loving action, it's a strong possibility that in the future I will be taking different actions, whether it's calling my representatives, or going to a rally, or writing a letter to the editor. So my question is it appropriate to identify yourself as a Zen Buddhist, to wear a rock suit?
In a political action?
While taking action, yeah. Loving action.
Oh, that's a really good question. Well, I suppose it would depend on the action. I think it would probably depend on what feels right to you. What might feel right to you might not feel right to someone else that's a Buddhist. I think if you're, and look, we live in a democracy. We all have a right to advocate for our point of view. And I don't think there's anything the matter with protesting, demonstrating, but when the line gets crossed between that into violence, and you think that you feel so righteous that you can justify doing violence to try to win your point of view, then I think you probably shouldn't be wearing that rock suit if you're doing that. But I've sat at prisons in parking lots with my rock suit and other Buddhists while someone was being executed, and there were people in the parking lot with having tailgate parties celebrating the execution, and I've sat right in the middle of that without saying a word, wearing my rock suit. That's one way to, kind of a Zen peacemaker way, is to bear witness to the situation without necessarily taking sides. I was taking a side. I mean, I wish they hadn't executed the person. But I acknowledged also that being in the parking lot at that time, and they did it at midnight, they don't do it, they do it at a time when most people won't be around, because it's such a... Anyway, there were people sad on one side, there were people celebrating on the other side, and I was just sitting in the middle of it, bearing witness to both. Once you take a side, it's hard to bear witness to the other side, and I think that tends to be the way of a Zen peacemaker would be, let's go to Auschwitz and hear the stories. Let's go to Auschwitz and bear witness to the pain of that, which is just immeasurable. It just doesn't end. But not necessarily go to Auschwitz and hold up signs and say down with Nazis or whatever. And I had this experience over and over again in the Zen Peacemaker order where I would go to, the first time I went to Auschwitz, I read all kinds of things about Germany and Auschwitz and fascists, and I was really kind of pissed off about the whole thing. And I got there and I was still pissed off, and I had a whole lot of opinions about it. And by the end of that week-long Bearing Witness retreat, I had something shifted in me. I didn't feel like I was innocent anymore. I felt like I could have been a Nazi guard. I could have been in Germany, in fascist Germany. I might have been one of those guys. It's possible. The perks. I don't know. I wasn't quite so righteous about the whole thing, and I just felt more humble, I guess, and my point of view wasn't so solid anymore. It was like, oh, there's other possibilities here, and it's all painful. And I bet that guard had a lot of pain too. Had to pay for that karmically in some way. So that's kind of, I think, what Bearing Witness does, is it opens you to things that you start to question your own assumptions, I think. It doesn't mean you don't act. It doesn't mean you come to a point where you feel like, I have to march, I have to demonstrate, this is important to me, and this is what it means to be have intellectual integrity. If someone's lying here, when Trump says Ukraine started the war, this is a lie. I'm pretty sure that's a lie. But so we're in a political situation where there's a lot of, Trump is kind of a zero-sum game with power, and everyone has to be loyal. It's kind of like when Stalin was, if you were in a meeting with Stalin, the Politburo, and Stalin says a long speech for 2 hours or something, and everyone has to clap. And the first person that stops clapping gets killed. So it's like, you clap. You're clapping for 20 minutes, it's kind of painful, but no one wants to be the first one to stop. That's kind of that feels to me kind of like what we're in. There's this, because Trump is very much wants loyalty. He's an authoritarian type of leader. I don't condone that. There's things that I think Trump is doing that might be okay, that I probably agree with. There's a lot of things he's doing I don't agree with. And the way he treated Zelensky and the publicly a couple of weeks ago, I thought was just shameful, really shameful. And so, I don't know where that takes me. I think it takes me back to the idea of the infinite game. That if you play politics as a finite game, which I think Trump does, I think it's not very effective. And I think America was founded on a promise that was an infinite promise. Everyone has the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That was a dream. That was a vision that people came to this country for. That was what we were founded on. That's an infinite. Have we fulfilled the promise? No, we've fallen far short of it. But that was a vision. And I think what's happened in our world now is everything has devolved into power on both sides of you just feel like you're so impotent, you can't do anything, then you've got to force your way, your point of view. And I just think that's very short-term thinking. And I think the things that move us, I think like Martin Luther King, I think he had a vision and he communicated it to us, which is why he was inspiring to everyone. So, yeah, I don't know. But it's a good question. I think it's really up to you, what feels right to you. Yeah.
Thank you so much for talking about this. I've been trying lately to, I don't know if you call it bear witness. I was talking to Roshi June about this, and just trying to understand this other sides.
Uh-huh.
Because I do feel like it's this war between,
Yeah.
our country is so divisive,
Yeah.
and people in my family are on what I would call the other side.
Yeah.
So sometimes lately I'm just trying to listen and understand, and then, so I can understand your experience at Auschwitz, how you thought you were standing on some firm ground and then it kind of shifted, and that's how I'm feeling. Well, where do values come into this, and how do you, I'm trying to figure out
Yeah.
what, in my professional life too, the research that I do is being questioned now by, I might be illegal what I'm doing, just because it's DEI related, right? So, just trying to question what's the hill I'm gonna die on,
Which battle are you gonna fight?
Where's the flexibility of it? Yeah.
Well, I think one question I hear you asking, which I think is actually really important, is how about our core values? Do they change? And my sense is they probably don't. I don't think our core values change. Our point of view might change. We might shift. We might be more open to another point of view, but I don't think core values change. Core values being honesty, empathy, truth, trying to be truthful, being respectful, kind, loving. I think those core values don't change. It's shocking that there are so many families now where there's families that are divided, that families can't even talk to each other because one member of the family is on one side, another is on the other side, and never the twain shall meet because the politics are broken. This person's listening to this information, this person is listening to this one, and it's like two different worlds. So it's very hard to bridge that chasm because this person talks to that person, and they're both shocked to hear the other person has such a totally different point of view, and it's very hard to understand. And I think the best way to approach this is to, it's not about questioning your core values. I don't think that's even on the table, but I do think you could question your assumptions about what you think is going on and be willing to entertain that you might, or even be almost certain that you don't have the whole picture, that none of us has the whole picture. Things are complicated, and everyone has a little bit of the truth, but they don't have all of it. And everyone's a little bit off, but they're not bad people because they have a different point of view from me. We're so quick to question people's motives as being somehow untoward, you know? That seems to me, no, I don't think that's, I don't accept that at all. If I'm listening to a MAGA Republican and I disagree with them, I doesn't, they're the same as me. They want to raise families and bring their kids to school, and they want to have a good life. And so I don't think you have to, just because you listen to someone doesn't mean that you agree with their point of view. I think we've gotten to the point where we almost feel like if I even listen to somebody, it's already, I'm compromised. I'm compromising my core values. And we have to, all this virtual signaling we do on the left, it gets kind of tiring after a while. And I just think that we should be a little bit more humble and question our own assumptions that we don't have the whole truth. and that someone else has some truth that we could learn from. And I think that would go a long ways to helping us sort things out. You still, at the end of the day, you do something, you know, you do the best you can. But you might change that a week from now. You may do it differently a week from now because you learned something new, because you were open to learning something new, and you say, gee, that it's more nuanced than I thought. DEI is more nuanced. I might have the intention to do DEI, but maybe the result of it is almost the opposite of what I was intending. So maybe I'm actually excluding people because the way I'm thinking about that is so rigid ideologically that I'm actually excluding people that don't agree with me. Yeah, so that's a problem, and it's hard to get at it because you have good intentions, but maybe there's unintended consequences that happen. And I think that's kind of what this Wu-wei is all about. How to show up and be present with people that have different points of view. And we might even feel offended by their behavior. But how not to be triggered into a reactive place that judges and dismisses and then just closes down, because now there's no more conversation possible. And I find that over and over again, that even trying to talk about something nuanced, it just gets, the politics don't do nuance. Social media does not do nuance. It does righteousness, yeah. It does meanness. And people say things to people on social media they would never say to their face. You wouldn't treat people this face to face. It would be rude in the extreme, unless you were just a rude person. So. Complex world we live in, and we're complex people, and I think in a way we don't do justice to ourselves when we reduce ourselves down to a particular ideological point of view and feel like we have to conform to that or we're a bad person, either side. And I think it's very hard not to do that. I think there's a lot of pressure to conform to your particular tribe, whatever tribe you're in. And if you go outside that tribe, which you're either side, you get, it's a little scary. You get blasted, you know, people start calling you a fascist or whatever. That's it. People are really fond of calling the other side fascist now. I'm so tired of it. Yeah, so you can.
Another question.
Yeah.
I'm in a room full of people who are really good at being flexible and dealing with change.
Yeah.
All of you, really.
Yeah.
And I could use some thoughts or reflections or advice on that, especially in the area of security. For me, for example, my job is my anchor and my refuge and my life, purpose, my sense of purpose.
Yeah.
And I'm very sad and scared for, not so much for my own situation, although things can always go into upheaval at any point, but people who are being laid off at this time.
People what?
People who are being laid off or losing their work. That really hits me. And I know that we can talk about, maybe talking about flexibility and how to work with that situation skillfully.
Well, first of all, I think the thing to be clear about when it comes to ourselves and our core values and our vows, like Bodhisattva vow, is what's most important is you have a clear mission of why you're doing what you do, and you're clear about that, and that doesn't change. Your mission or your vision doesn't change. You want to help people. You like, why did you become a librarian? You love to read. You have a very active mind, more than almost anyone I know, because I think you read so much. I think it actually, I can tell something about you because you read it. So I think there's something about that we have our particular mission about why we are here, to be clear about that. That doesn't change. And I think if you are rooted in that, then there's less fear, because people will understand your vision on both sides, because it's not a finite game that you're playing. That's an infinite game. Your vision is always, I think, for most people, if you're really being clear, it's infinite, and people will not, you can't. That's not about winning or losing. The Bodhisattva vow, if you're living to heal suffering in all human beings, it's a universal vow for everyone, not just your family or the people you like. If that's what gets you up in the morning, I don't think you need to be afraid of communicating that. Now, when it comes to the details of things, people being laid off, that's painful, and people can have, again, I would think, for the person being laid off, that's going to be really rough. And people do lose their jobs, and we're in a kind of an economy that is disrupted, where there's going to be more job loss. And you're going to have to figure that one out on a case-by-case basis. How do you want to work with that, or what you think is the most skillful thing you can do? That's painful for the people being laid off. So I don't really have an answer to that. But I do think it's could be useful to be flexible, to try to understand, try to look at something from a larger perspective, perhaps, that there's a bigger picture that you might not be appreciating, and
Stretching the imagination and being flexible.
people disagree on even what's important. That's why I say that your mission doesn't change, but people will, if you're a conservative person, you're trying to preserve, so really a conservative Republican is about conserving something. I'm not talking about MAGA Republicans, because they're different, but if you're a real principled conservative, you're conservative because you want to conserve things, institutions and intellect and things that you feel are getting lost. If you're a progressive, you want to change things and move things forward. And both of those are valid. And would it be possible to have this kind of liberal way of looking at the world integrated with that in us, which is also conservative and needs to conserve something? And what would it look like if we weren't just basing our identity on the politics of the moment, and we were just trying to take a little deeper dive into what's going on, and with some humility that we may not even know what's going on, and that historians will talk about this 100 years from now, if we're still here, in a way that we couldn't even conceive of it now. So we're going to have a point of view, but we might hold it a little less tightly. That helps. But you don't need to worry. Are you worried about losing your job?
No.
You've got to be a good librarian. I wouldn't think that anyone would want to.
Public libraries are funded by local property taxes.
So you don't have to worry about the federal stuff. impacting him. That's probably good thing there.
But I look around me, it's also an empathetic concern.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of fear out there
Oh,
now.
yes, yeah.
All of the people who
Yeah.
are looking at losing their jobs.
Yes.
Because I remember when I lost my job,
Yeah.
there was a lot of fear because of uncertainty.
Yeah.
So that's, and the immigrants also are facing a lot of fear being deported to, and losing there. So, how, I guess the question is, how do you work with that fear, right? How do you work with that fear for yourself and others? I had a practice, that helped me a lot. My practice of sitting
Yeah.
was really very helpful for me.
Well, the first thing I would say, I don't think that things are one issue. You can pull something out and say it's immigration, or it's people are losing their jobs, or it's the environment, or it's global warming, or it's gender or something, or it's DEI. Yeah, you can pull anything out, but I think you're decontextualizing something when you make it one issue. And immigration will be an ongoing dynamic from here till whenever, as long as there's more climate trauma in the South. There's going to be people moving north. They have to. And the more the living conditions are extreme, the more the immigration will happen, and the more there'll be populist political movements springing up in reaction to that. And that's a dynamic that's taking place. And but it's not. It's interlinked with a lot of other things that are going on at the same time.
Right, I'm not arguing that, I'm just saying, how do you work with that fear? Personally, is a big part of it, right? 'Cause
Yeah, I think
I feel like there's only so much.
I think you have to acknowledge the fear. You have to start by acknowledging that you have fear, you're afraid of losing your job or whatever it is, and then you kind of get to, you realize you really don't have control over the situation. You're not going to be able to, it's probably not going to turn out the way that you would like it to turn out, and you let go. You let go of your job eventually. You let go of your identity around that and all that goes with it, and you realize maybe it's an opportunity for you. It's actually ended up being an opportunity to start a Buddha school and be a Zen teacher in a way that you couldn't have done before, but you didn't know that at the time. So I think part of working with fear is realizing that we're in a box based on what we're experiencing now, and practice can actually help us kind of be outside of that box and realize there's something about our mind, something about reality which is very clear and doesn't have anything to do with those things. And practice gives you some kind of ground in this experience of mind which is pristine, really. It's not awakened. There's a possibility you are awakened, you are intrinsically awakened. I think having that experience of that there's no fear in that. That doesn't participate in fear in the same way as other things we do. And I think if you have a realization of that as the basis of reality, then it gives you a possibility of being more resilient in the face of the fear. The relative world is just as real, I'm not discounting that, but it's not, it doesn't take you down in the same way. And it didn't take you down, you moved on.
I know, and,
It was hard.
I feel that I'm also very privileged, you know, I don't have
Yeah.
children I have to take care of,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
That I need this job,
yeah,
to provide for, so, you know, I just feel for those people who
Sure.
are
yeah. It was-
very fearful of
There are-
losing their source of income.
And there are a lot of young people now that have families that can't afford childcare, and they have to work 2 jobs. There's all kinds of
Yeah.
pressures on people now that are causing a lot of suffering. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this idea that I need to understand the other's point of view, I'm never going to. So I just have to let that go and accept that they're entitled to their opinions. I might not like them, I'm never going to understand it. I'm just not. As soon as I start saying, I just can't understand it and think I should be able to, I'm going to get myself in a bind. But it's opinions. You know, they're taking these opinions and they're moving with them. But it's just their thoughts, and I have no control of it, and I'm never going to understand it.
Yeah, well, what I think we often react to is someone's prejudice, which feels unjustified, and we rightly kind of have a moral reaction to someone's prejudice, which is way too small, and it's unjustified, it does injustice to a whole group of people or something, and then you have a moral reaction to that, which is, I think, really appropriate. But then you could, if you were being skillful, and this is easier said than done, but if someone has a strong point of view or an opinion, you might get just, instead of you reacting with a judgment, you could replace your judgment with curiosity and say, well, you could ask them, you know, how did you come to that point of view? Tell me a story in your life that caused you to have this, the way you're looking at the world, and then you're getting beneath their opinion and starting to get at their life experience that's informed them in a certain way that you probably have no idea of what that is, the way they were raised, who their parents were, how they were treated as a child, the culture they grew up in, the people they were around, the news channel they watch.
But even still, I'm still not, I'm most likely still not going to understand it.
You might not.
You know, a pure hatred, I'm just not going to understand it.
NBC probably is helpful at this point, because you differentiate the emotion from the need. So even someone that has pure hatred, there is an underlying need that's not being met that is causing them to interpret that through hatred, which is unskillful, to say the least. And it's not going to meet their needs, so they're going to shoot themselves in the foot for sure. But their need might be safety. They might just be scared shitless. And their reaction to their fear is anger. And I'm going to attack someone. That could be their reaction to their fear. And if you understood the underlying need that they have that's not being met, that's giving rise to that emotion or that point of view, you could actually connect with them on the level of their needs, because you have the same kind of need about safety, but you both have a different strategy for meeting it. And so I think that's a way, NBC is a way to get underneath the opinions and the prejudice and the point of view and the toxicity of a lot of that. And everyone's needs are more or less the same. Everyone needs to survive. Everyone needs a job where they feel dignified. Everyone needs to be heard and listened to. You know, we have the same kind of needs, and if our needs aren't being met and we don't know how to meet them, or we don't even realize that they're important, then we tend to end up being jackals that shoot ourselves in the foot, and we create a lot of suffering. But then that's why we take the bodhisattva vows, to try to heal. How can we heal that suffering? I mean,
But when you see families breaking up, and people
yeah.
not talking to their brother or sister because of their opinion, that's hard for me to understand. Just let them have their opinion. I'm not going to change your opinion.
Well, I don't think you have to worry about understanding everything, but you could bear witness to that family's separation and the trauma that's being caused by that, without necessarily understanding everything about all the dynamics. Yeah.
Yeah, I know time is not for me, but with relation to what's being said in the perspective of a bodhisattva, let's say a bodhisattva in training in the world, what about the potential, if I don't have the desire or an attitude, well, I don't care what their opinion is, have it, but it's a closed door, like, I'm not interested in that person.
Yeah.
So, my one question on one prong is, does that then indicate to me that the bodhisattva that I am, that goes against it? I should be questioning that, because I should not care. And the other question I have is, if I don't care, would you recommend that I begin to care and fake it till I make it as bodhisattva training to begin to care? Because I'm not going to save all sentient beings if I shut anybody out, if I don't have interest.
That's right.
So that's my two-pronger
Well, it's a good question.
for next time.
I don't think I have an answer to that. I don't think you can love everyone equally.
Right.
So there's going to be some people you're fonder of than others. But if you have a kind of equanimity, then you could at least consider that person that you don't care about.
Right.
If the circumstances warrant it. But you can't. Yeah, I think it's important to realize when we take the bodhisattva vow, it's a universal vow of benevolence. And so we are trying as best we can to treat people, everyone, with respect and have a certain kind of equanimity so that we are patient with people that are trying to us that we don't like, and we give them the benefit of the doubt if we can, and then we have days that aren't our good days where we just don't do that.
Right, but if I have it as a bodhisattva, if I can approach somebody with open-mindedness and flexibility, it might be the rare opportunity they then have to become flexible and open-hearted.
Yeah.
Maybe no one's talked, maybe they don't have that from anybody.
Yeah, but that's right. So if you closed yourself down, you're not going to learn anything about them
Right.
that might actually inspire you to open and be moved by them in some way. But I think it's important not to be too idealistic about all this because, it's a big vow. So it's just like the American dream is a big vision, and we haven't yet fulfilled it.
Right.
We're far short. We've fallen far short of it, but that doesn't invalidate the dream itself. And so the Bodhisattva vow is that kind of dream, and we do our best to activate it in our lives, and we fall far short of it much of the time. And it's probably important to, in many cases, forgive ourselves for not being a perfect Bodhisattva, because it's, if you're trying to bring peace in the world, you're probably going to fail.
Right.
So you're going to have to accept some failure. If you have a big vision, the more bigger your vision is, the harder, the less likely it is to be actualized in a concrete way everywhere.
So you work with the relationships that you have.
Saving all sentient beings is also saving yourself. So if you don't have a kindness and empathy towards how difficult it might be for you in a situation, then it's going to be very hard to have that kindness to someone else. So this is kind of paradox. In order to be compassionate to others, we have to have some compassion for ourselves and for the places that scare us, we're our dark neighborhoods, where we don't want to visit. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Prepare for an amazing lunch. No doubt. No doubt.
Hey, Steve and Linda. Hi.
Oh, goodness.